Well, good afternoon, evening, probably not morning anywhere except I suppose if we're in Hawaii. If there are anybody in Hawaii, aloha, because that would be an awesome place to be to do load testing. I'm going to talk about my experience in driving red line via CLI. Um, I realized after looking at all the other presentations that I could have included more, but not really on what I do. My name is Nik Gregory. I'm currently a principal SDET at Acquia Inc. Ever since I started in software quite a while ago, I've been doing QE, and I've been looking at QE from the functional performance and scalability sort of sides of QE. And when I'm scalability, I'm talking about how applications scale based on traffic load, data size in the big O world. Um, Fun fact, which I thought of, the worst thing I ever scaled tested literally scaled like n factorial. And it took several weeks to convince people that that wasn't a good thing. I am a relatively recent Redline 13 user, I think about 6 months ish or so of Redline. And I'm not a fan of using GUIs for repetitive tasks, which is why I ended up with trying to drive Redline with the CLI. Um, a little bit about Acquia and the project I'm working on, Acquia Cloud Next. Uh, just note, I am not a sales guy, so I'm probably the worst sales guy ever. Aquia is the digital experience platform. We host Drupal-based websites. We provide a personalization engine, marketing campaigns, digital asset management, and more or less whatever you need for us to be a one-stop shop for digital experiences. And I recall somebody saying how awesome Redline was because they get back to you in like a day or less when you had a problem. And Acquia strives to be that way as well on sort of the enterprise scale. So we consider ourselves the white glove of digital experiences. If you have a problem, you send a ticket in, we respond very quickly and attempt to solve problems. That's probably the best sales pitch I've ever done for Acquia in my entire life. Acquia Cloud Next is our next generation Drupal hosting platform. It's meant to be a Kubernetes, not meant to be, it is a Kubernetes native auto scaling platform for serving content. I was brought into the performance team maybe about 8 months ago when we were realizing that, oh, we have something we're about to go limited availability, and we haven't really gotten any sort of work done proving that it will actually work the way it's supposed to. So it's a Kubernetes native platform. We have auto scaling pods based on traffic, and we had the dev sprint teams doing some work and trying to generate load, and we noticed some radical difference between Kubernetes generated load and web traffic generated load. So sort of the first attempt was with the dev teams. They used synthetic sites with sleeps and artificial CPU load. Our platform scaled fantastic. Like, I mean, we burnt a bunch of AWS money, but we had served, I don't know, like NLB layers, levels of requests per second, and everything looked great. We thought, well, we ought to check this for sure before we actually go live with customers who have bytes that they care about. And they brought me in. I created an exemplar Drupal site. Hopefully, I don't have any typos. The performance team, which was me and this other guy, executed some of the tests, and it scaled okay, but we noticed some hiccups. Like, it would scale, we'd hit a bunch of errors, and then it would sort of fix it, and we'd continue on. And we could not support nearly the same amount of traffic, shall we say, in terms of requests per second that we could with the synthetic sites. So Acquia learned quickly that there's a big difference between running your actual workload and running what you thought load might be. Probably something everybody who does performance and load testing knows already, but what it is. So the use case, this is a poorly named slide, but the use case and what we're trying to do is sort of weekly baselining of our system. We run in Scrum teams and tend to do about daily changes to our Kubernetes infrastructure and daily changes to our services pods and jobs definitions. At the moment, there's no wide-in automation for running performance tests. And while we use a CD pipeline-ish for deployments, we don't have a full end-to-end CI/CD pipeline for deploying new infrastructure or new or changes to services pods and job definitions. In which case, I would literally wire in somewhere along that route a performance test on a staging pod. The other thing I want to do is we had a team of me and then another guy, and I'm working on performance execution standardization. So building on a team, hiring new engineers. I want to establish some standards for test definitions, and want to establish standards for how we intend to do test execution. And some of this was the CLI was really sort of me wrapping my brain around how I want to be doing this, and it harkens back to some the guy, I'm sorry about names, I'm horrible with him, the guy from ACT who talked about the naming conventions for tests, and I'm more or less in the similar boat now. So the problem I was running into was I was sort of thrown headfirst into a performance problem. Well, for me, recent onboarding to using Redline 13, we had lots of tests to run, and by lots I mean, and Chris could probably back me up, but I think we maybe ran 100 load tests in the first 2 weeks, and each of these ran like an hour-ish. So we burnt a lot of VUs, or would have, and that gave me lots of data that I had to download and analyze it, and that meant I was clicking in the Redline hundreds of times. And I may have mentioned earlier, I don't really like using GUIs for repetitive tasks. So being, I guess you could say, the good kind of lazy, in reality, I'm just lazy. I thought I would write a CLI wrapper around the Redline 13 API. I know Ruby somewhat, and I've used for writing CLIs before. It's a fairly nice wrapper around creating CLIs. It allows you to, if you do it right, create CLIs that you can unit test and make sure you have all your stuff working, behaving properly before you make changes. For use for our team stuff, I have it read an API creds from local disk so that every engineer can run their own tests, rather than if you were, I'm saying it's a bad thing, but if you're running via Jenkins, it'd be one guy running all the tests, unless you do tagging or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, this is the Jenkins guy. I know him. So the first thing I ended up needing, because I had hundreds of tests, was gathering the JTLs, the JMeter reports, I think that's probably everything I really needed, sort of short term. So wrote a little command to download the stats, and I give it a test ID, the type of stats I want to download. I typically, because I am a data hoarder, just pick all, because that gives me the JMeter, the merge JTL, the JMeter report, output files, and all the other data. It dumps it into a directory appended by the test ID. I was able to use judicious use of find and other stuff to pipe that into my hacked data analysis system as well. So when I'd run the command on an example test run, get all the data, I pick up the server stats, response times, yada, yada, yada. Really exciting. And then I needed to do some more stuff, because I wanted to be able to, one, actually list the tests. So right at that point, I was still using like the known test IDs that I had. But in reality, I don't even want to, I'm lazy enough, I want to be able to just find those. So I implemented some stuff for the endpoints that that Redline provides. And so I have the download stats. I have something that makes a summary in the ballpark of what you get on the front page of the Redline report. I hacked it together, so I could not guarantee its accuracy, but it works well enough for me. Command to get the summary of a specific run, way to list all the load test runs, and some of the metadata for the load test run. It's basically a get all the tests and use a filter for the name. A way to start a test, because in the end, that's going to be important for me to not have to necessarily go into Redline to start tests, so I can advertise to our other teams hey, pull down the CLI, use your API key, and get it to run. And then, or just just because I need it for knowing when tests are done, a thing to loop and wait and pull to see what the status of test runs are when I give it an ID. So an example, for example, of getting the summary data, I can list a test. So I list the test with filtering on the name. I say, you know what, I want to see the load test name thing out of the JSON blob I get back. I get the test ID, which is 214012, the load test name, and I say, okay, generate the summary. And in this case, I get something that's a text representation of that little box that you get, a nice little box at the front when you load a test result. I have the name, I have the URL of the test so that someone could click if they needed to, how long the test, how many requests I ran, the errors, my error percent, and for the stuff that I need to do sort of on a weekly basis, percentiles that I can then insert into our sort of long-term reporting system, which sadly I think is a spreadsheet. For running a load test, which is sort of the end goal of wrapping this stuff around, wrapping scripts around this and having other engineering teams run load tests. I had implemented two options. One, which is sort of give all the inputs on the command line, which is rather painful, but does work. But that includes like agent your JMX file, RAM time duration, blah, blah, blah. Or I came up with a test definition YAML. And when you run a test, it emits a test ID. I want to talk a little bit about the test definition YAML, not because I'm really proud of it, but it at least gives a sort of description of what my consumers will want to use. I can say tell them how many agents they'll have, what their JMeter file is, the RAM time and duration. And I realize these are wired into standardization of the JMS itself, because if those variables don't exist, it won't behave so well. Whatever support files are needed and the options that I want to use when I launch JMeter, and then where I want my agents to be and how big they want, and if I need any extra files. So I execute a command, I get a load test ID back, which I can use later on if I need to wait for that test to actually execute. I guess I can talk about some successes and then what I intend to do in the future. For me, because I'm lazy and don't like doing stuff manually, I could download hundreds of JTLs for offline analysis from that earlier run. And relatively recently, I had to do a bunch of short performance tests comparing sort of as we tweaked our Kubernetes infrastructure and sort of checking behavior of our system based on the amount of users we had and the amount of pods that we were running. And I could use the summary data collector to build up some meta-analysis for like 50 plus runs to compare on pods versus VUs versus error rate. It was more convenient than having to grab all that stuff and stick it into a spreadsheet, for example, to then do the same thing. For the future, I want to do some insertion of these JMeter results into a database for long-term trend analysis. So the idea I have is, I'll be able to query at any time, query red lines like, hey, give me the JTL, find the load test ID, stick it somewhere. Still thinking on that plan. I need to finalize a taxonomy / language / naming convention, I guess, that we can use for our test sorting, storing, and tagging so that we can find them and we understand what they mean, advertise to our development teams so they can use to execute tests, because the idea is not all that dissimilar from the distributed testing guy. Is my team and I will provide a service that people can use and we'll provide guidance, but ideally we won't be the 4 or 5 people that are bottlenecking R&D organization of 250 people. And then eventually maybe make this tooling available to the community if they find it useful. I am going to do a live demo. I must warn you, I have gotten reputations of Nik-like typing detected when I've done texts. So I think I actually prepped this stuff with pre-baked commands like you would do in look at that, like you would do in a baking show. So hopefully I have those. So the first thing I'm going to do is list all the jobs with the job names that match load test. And we see I've run a bunch of jobs. I have some example jobs. There's this infamous 214012 job that I worked on earlier just to prove this stuff out and prep for this. And you get a hint of what I may do later. So then we can say, for example, look at our job info, which I used my get command, piped it into a JSON predefined tool. You can see this is actually the same JSON blob that we get back from Redline. It's relatively readable, and at least it's sort of a easy, quick glance. And in fact, I use these bits, like the load test ID and load test name, as part of the filter in this this list command. So I could conceivably say, give me the load test name for things that match load test, and also show me any comments that I had, or the description, or success rate, or whatever. See if I don't delete my screen. For my sort of weekly reporting work on the weekly run that we kick off, which is our sort of re-baseline run to figure out how our system has shifted week to week. Apparently I put it in the wrong spot, or I didn't copy. Let's try that again. I have my generate summary command. And in this case, I've chosen a YAML format, but I could also output CSV or a JSON or a simple table. And you see I have the name, the URL, how long the thing took, how many errors I got, all 2 of them, the request per second that I happen to generate, and the standard 90, 95th, and 99th percentile. If for some reason I were interested in more percentiles, I could just ask for more. So I could say, give me the 25th, the 50th, 75th, 90th, 95, 99 percentile. I didn't make any typos, it should come out. Yeah, so we have now more percentiles, and essentially the entire set of percentiles if you cared to from Redline. On the same vein, let's say I wanted to, though I'm not going to do it now, but let's say I wanted to take to the JTL and do some offline analysis of it. I could, so I would download the stats. So pull the stats, we'll take all the stats. In this case, we're grabbing the server, the response times, our merged JTL, the Redline report, the JMeter report, and if I were being extremely lazy, I can even hopefully just open it up in my browser. And so now we have the nice JMeter report that everybody knows and loves and can read through. And sort of the final thing I was working towards was executing a load test. So I have my command, start the test. I gave it a name. I pointed to where my JMX file exists, and where my test definition YAML is. It picks up a load test and leaves me an ID. And I could conceivably wait for the 3 or so minutes that this test is supposed to take, if I actually put the ID value in. And it's still waiting. And we can look at Redline. And take a look and see I've started the test. It's exciting, but for me it's exciting because I don't have to do this in the UI, and it's nothing to do with the Redline UI. It's the personal hangups I get. So I'll just let this run, and that's really about it. This went faster than I expected. So, any questions? And I'm not sure how to see any questions either because I'm backstage hiding.
Thank you, Nik. All right. So, as Nik was saying, now's the time to ask your questions. While they're typing their questions, let's see. So, in doing all this, do you have an idea of like how much time? I mean, you did these things. It was really to save time. Is that a fair?
It was just time and just sort of mental aggravation because I really do have a hang up of like if I could automate it, I'd rather automate it and not have to do it more than once. So, or I guess you could say for an example of how many clicks would it take for me to download 100 JTLs, right? I need to click in, I need to find the test, and potentially, if it's the worst case, I find a test. I click down into the area that says, give me the output files. I do give me the merged JTLs, save it somewhere, right? And then I back out and do that another 100 times. Right? In this case, I can list the test IDs that match at least a naming pattern, and I'll come up with something, better matches later probably. Pipe those into essentially, pipe it into a for loop, download all the results somewhere, and now I have all the JTLs, and that happens in, like 3 minutes or something. So, I can take all the data that I'm interested in, deal with it, and work on it later. And then for the example I gave as the other success, which was the sort of 50 relatively quick runs that I did with one of the teams, I needed to look at the individual percentiles for based on VU and error rate and whatever. And so I needed that summary page or something like that summary page for 50 runs. And I can't even imagine how error prone I would have been had I had to uh, essentially screen scrape. And no offense again to your UI because I like it and it's nice when you click on it. But if I had to screen scrape all those percentiles uh, and dump them into a spreadsheet or something like that, it would have been a disaster, at least for me. Because shockingly, my Nik-like typing wasn't detected here, but normally I have about a 50% hit rate on my on any letter I expect to type.
All right.
So I don't know. Overall time, not right now. I can download every single test I have in probably 30 minutes, and I think we're at like 400 test runs,
Hmm.
for example. There's no way. I mean, you have to be a serious ninja in the browser to do that.
Right. Right. Well, I see there was a comment here, not a question, that said from Pedro Costa said, "Awesome presentation."
I paid him to say that. So.
Okay. um, I mean, how do I say this? The stuff that you've created. I mean, it's is that something shareable here that we could share out to other folks here? Or?
I have to, at the moment, I can't, mostly because of the repo I built it in. That is one of the things that I want to do in the future is hopefully open source this. Um, I have the technical ability to like because of my role at Acquia, I could conceivably just open source it, but that probably isn't the best way to do things. So, like, what I will need to do is split this out from this particular repo that I'm working in and sort of turn it into a regular little project. Because it's not that there's nothing secret sauce in the repo itself. It's just a Drupal site with a bunch of other like ancillary bits, and the ancillary bits of this scripting stuff that I've worked on. So there's nothing proprietary in any way, but there's steps we have to go through as a company of 1,000+ people to open
Yeah.
source stuff. When you
Well,
were 10, you could just click the button on GitHub and say open source it, and no one cared. Now they care. So, so it's something I would like to do because if people have better ideas or whatever on how to do this, or have like you have people ask for what do you want to see next in Redline 13, and I say, would be really great is if we had an overlay plot of the number of threads versus like response time or error rate or something like that. See what I did there, Chris, for you? But be nice if someone said, yeah, for this, driving test or whatever, I know what I want, but I don't necessarily know what other people want, and I'd be happy to make other people's lives like easier.
Well, we are, as we talked about earlier, we're definitely interested in your suggestions, and we're already looking at those. So, all right, you got another comment from Emily Wren. Said great presentation.
Thank you, Emily. So my next time we do this, I have a different presentation I can do, and hopefully I have the database hooked up of my analysis tool thing instead of, because again, this is the, I'm working on hundreds of runs and comparison and long-term trends on hundreds of runs, right? Because my goal, like what my role is at Aquia, is load and performance testing a hosting platform. I think I know I said it to you, Chris, and when Emily was working with us, I said it to her, it's like, I literally don't care on the individual site, because that's not what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out how the Acquia hosting platform behaves as we get real web loads. And as we discovered, and as AWS has discovered, and the Kubernetes folks have discovered, they thought they knew how stuff worked, but it doesn't always work the way they thought it, they did. Technically, it works how they wrote it, but the way they wrote it doesn't actually fit with what happens when you throw real workloads in this sort of random sense at a Kubernetes-based hosting layer.
All right. Let's see. I see that Bob, who's our next speaker, also made a comment. I'll let Bob talk about that. So Bob is going to come on here. Actually, I'll bring on Bob. Bob, did you want to?
There.
Hi,
I was just going to say, Dries would I'm sure be open to open sourcing it.
Yeah. Now you're name dropping. Dries is the guy who invented Drupal, and he's the CTO of Aquia. So that's. Yeah.
I knew him back in the day. See, I'm an old man.
Yeah, I'm old. I just look young. I tease. I say I have a portrait that looks like I'm 180 over in the living room. But
all right. Well, thanks a lot, Nik.